passion for, and I just love the work that they're doing there. And I'm honored to be here today to talk about this important topic. I know that all of you care as well. Let's have a good discussion tonight. So, just to recap, the trending Netflix series 13 Reasons Why is based on the novel of the same name by an author named Jay Asher. The series revolves around a 17-year-old named Hannah Baker who takes her own life and leaves behind audio recordings for 13 people who she says contributed to her suicide in some way. Now, each episode is based on a tape, and each tape explains the blame she's placed on one of her peers. The tapes recount painful events, some very graphically, including bullying, rape, drunk driving, slut-shaming, and ultimately Hannah's suicide. The series also highlights the consequences of teenagers witnessing assaults and bullying as bystanders and not taking action to address the situation. While Hannah is the main character, the overall series follows several plot lines that unravels the struggles some of the other students are dealing with, such as sexual assault, loneliness, alcohol and drug abuse, neglect, and even temporary homelessness. Now, as you know, the topics portrayed in 13 Reasons Why have caused an uproar of opinions in the media, as the show is a dangerous trigger, or could we use it as a tool? That's the question. Can we use it as a tool to educate young people and beyond? The hope of this panel is to generate a positive discussion around the topic of mental health awareness and suicide prevention. Now, we ask that everyone, of course, is respectful of one another, or as the Mental Health Foundation likes to say, let's be nice to each other during this while the panelists are voicing their opinions and expertise. Of course, this is not a presidential debate. This is a community discussion. So let's introduce the panelists today. Of course, Christy Buck. We already know Christy. I think everyone knows Christy. She's the Executive Director of the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan. Mental Health Foundation Program Coordinator Kat Lanting. Dr. Valencia Agnew, Owner and Clinical Director of Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services. Rockford High School Counselor and Peer Listeners Advisor Sarah Young. Live, Laugh, Love educator Spencer Hansen. From Forest Hills Northern, a student, Jack Gendrasiak, and two Granville High School students, Caitlin Hickson and Lucy Van Dyke. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. So just so you know how things are going to go tonight, each question will be assigned to a specific panelist, and then people will have about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, to discuss between the panelists. It will last until 7 o'clock tonight, and then at that time, the audience will be given a chance to ask questions or bring up concerns until about 7:20, and then that will conclude the event. You'll then be invited to talk to panelists individually. You'll be encouraged to take resources provided here on the table. We have a lot going on back there. Everyone ready? Let's begin. Okay, we're going to start at the other end of the table with the students tonight. Do you believe the show gives an accurate depiction of what it's like to be in high school? I think a lot of people were really shocked by what they're seeing in this program. Is it accurate? Do instances in the show seem far-fetched, or can you relate to characters and scenes in this show? Jack, let's start with you.
Hi, yeah, unfortunately I would like to say that from my experiences, some of the social interactions between students happen to be very accurate. Now, some of the substance abuse, I believe, was a little hyperbolized in the series, but unfortunately, a lot of the terrible things that you see are kind of just dismissed between students, as sometimes they think it's a joke or sometimes they think it's acceptable. But unfortunately, overall, from my experiences, some of the events that happened to Hannah are very relatable and resonated with me as I was watching the series.
Yeah, I agree with Jack. I was in high school 5 years ago, and I think a lot of what went on I was able to relate to myself. I thought the dialogue of the show was very organic. Additionally, there's a part of the show where there's a picture of Hannah that spreads around the school pretty quickly. And I think everybody has an iPhone nowadays, everybody's in a group chat, and just how fast information or photos can spread of somebody that could have a negative impact on how other people see them was represented pretty well. You guys have anything to say?
I know we don't want to believe that they are dramatized, but they are accurate, and the writing on the walls, I know we have some of that at our school. The swear words in the hallways, yeah, that's sadly true. We don't want to believe it, but it's pretty accurate.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Well, Kat, this next question is for you. The series is getting a lot of flack from mental health advocates who believe the show glamorizes suicide. For those who don't have a background in mental health, what does it mean to glamorize suicide? What does that mean? And what effects can it have? So can you comment on the instance that Hannah wants to have all these things like popularity and acceptance and love and all these things? What do you think about this?
All right, thanks. So we know that there's nothing glamorous about suicide. There's nothing glamorous about the feeling of depression. So it's kind of hard to put those two words together in a question or a sentence. But when we hear that on the radio, on TV, that we're saying we've got to continue that conversation, is what we can really do is take this show, start conversation about it with young people, with other adults, and start talking about how, no, this is not what happens, right? When someone dies by suicide, there's no way for them to send messages. And I think that's a really honest conversation that we can have with young people, because I could possibly be in the brain. What the TV show does get really right are signs and symptoms, risk factors, stressors. I know we're going to talk about those tonight. So it might put us in the situation of knowing what it possibly could feel like for Hannah to have all of these triggers and stressors happen at the same time. But yet, she really does get into a situation where at the end of the show, it comes to be, right? All of these things happen, and then there's going to be a second season. So we have to be armed with the right tools and resources. And I know we're going to get into that later in our discussion of starting those conversations of, no, if someone were to die by suicide, what happens? Is there a memorial? Do people take selfies in front of the locker? I know that's what some of the friends did. So those are dangerous images for young people to see without that conversation of, this is not an option. It's not glamorous. And they may have done that by the scene, which we're talking about really intense scenes. Can we get a show of hands in the room who's watched the show? Okay. So when we're talking about specific scenes, that's good. But those are discussions we have to have. So maybe even watching it with my teen or with another adult and saying, hey, what happens when someone dies by suicide? Well, we might walk through these steps. That person doesn't have that ability, and this was a Hollywood dramatization that she was able to do that.
Right, Kat, thank you. Well, Christy, a community member wrote that there was a suicide at my daughter's school. The school did not have any information. They said they didn't want to memorialize what happened for fear of creating copycat suicide. So, Christy, in your opinion, how should situations like this be handled?
Is this on?
Yeah, you just got to click that.
Okay. For one, when a school does experience a suicide, many times the respect goes to the family first and foremost. And the more we educate the community how important it is to bring awareness about, and this is following suicides. Unfortunately, part of postvention is also prevention. So, and we know that a natural occurrence happens when someone does die. Students automatically, they want to grieve, they want to memorialize, and we've seen this on several different occasions when students lose their lives to car accidents, to drug overdoses, whatever. Again, families, that's where the awareness piece is going to come in. How can we help you, and how can you help the school? Now, in this particular movie, that was not allowed. I mean, what I got out of that was that it kind of just went from Hannah dying to Hannah being buried without the school being part of anything, because, again, there were so many questions as to whose fault it was. And there was never any discussion about the fact that she lost a battle to a very serious illness called depression. That was one thing that I was extremely unimpressed with in the whole series, was depression was never mentioned. She was sad, she was lonely. They gave some of the symptoms, but they never talked about the illness. So we know that we need to talk more about it. This word copycat is now out there. In fact, I got a text message today about a rumor that there was somebody who had a copycat suicide. Okay, whenever somebody takes their life by suicide, there is something very deep going on. It's not just copycatting. It is seeing that that is a solution to end their problems, possibly like the character in the movie, but all out, we know that we need to be on high alert when people are watching the movie who may be struggling with an illness called depression. On a final note, there's a lot of information out there through great websites about how schools should handle the loss of a student after suicide. And I personally, at the Mental Health Foundation, have distributed these to schools. And that is a go-to source at the MHF to give people information. We don't want this ever to happen. That is seriously the goal of the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Kent County, and of course the county Zero Suicides and the Mental Health Foundation, but we need to keep talking about it.
Christy, thank you. The National Association of School Psychologists released a statement saying, "We do not recommend that vulnerable youth, especially those who have any degree of suicide ideation, watch this series. Binge watching 13 Reasons does not allow the viewer time to process all that has been seen and heard. For a non-vulnerable population, this may not be an issue." Now, however, we're talking about kids. For those who would already be triggered, it can be a big deal. So, Dr. Valencia, can you explain why some scenes in 13 Reasons can be triggers for someone struggling with mental health, and why it could be difficult to watch for someone who has considered or attempted suicide?
What we've found in our practice alone is that the kids who are most vulnerable, the ones who are struggling emotionally, if they binge watch 13 Reasons, they're watching it and they're not able to process it with anyone. They're not taking the time to sit and talk to someone about what they took in. So it's like experiencing a trauma over and over and over. And Hannah goes, and her friends, they go from one trauma to the next, from one rape to the next, from one assault to the next, from one scene where photos are being spread throughout the school to the next. So the vulnerable population, if they're watching these scenes and they're being triggered by it, they're not having a chance to sit and process it, and it becomes more risky for them. It becomes even more of a risk factor, more dangerous, where we're worried about our clients and we're spending time processing with parents and with our clients, letting them know that we do not recommend binge watching it. And even for our therapists watching it and trying to prepare and talk, we found ourselves that it was a bit much to take in if we tried to binge watch it, because it was affecting the real lives of people that we know, or people that we've seen who have experienced things that are in the series.
So, Doctor, what do you suggest for parents who do want to address this issue head-on with their kids with this series? Watching it in smaller doses, watching it and having a discussion after each episode?
Watching it in smaller doses, and definitely if you can get your team to have a conversation with you after each episode and to talk about the reality of the show. Some of the students already talked about it's real life. Those are things that the kids are experiencing for real at school, and to be able to talk with them about it. And if it's not happening with your team, then to ask, do they know some other students who are experiencing those things, and process it with them, and talk about how to do self-care afterwards, and have them see you role model doing self-care afterwards. If you're able to say, wow, that was a lot to take in. Wow, other students go through this. Okay, you know what? We're going to need to do some self-care to regroup after having seen some of these things.
Thank you. Well, Jack, not to call you out, but you had said that you had a strong opinion that Hannah's suicide decision was not made on a whim. You did not feel it was glamorized. Can you explain that?
No, yeah, I can't explain it, but I definitely don't feel like it was glamorized at all. And I recently had a classroom discussion with a bunch of my peers discussing suicide, and many of them felt the same way. But watching the series at the time that I watched it, I was at a point where I was kind of having lower self-esteem, and I didn't feel great in a position where I was. But I started watching 13 Reasons Why, and I got through the first 3 episodes, and then I was like, wow, this is so accurate. And so I decided right then and there that I needed to watch this with a group of people. So my sister and my mom, and we all went down and we started watching it and really getting through all of the things that Hannah went through and how many of the things that I could relate to. The series was almost therapeutic for me in a way, because I was able to zoom out and see the bigger picture and see all of the things that were happening, and I was able to evaluate all of the things going on around me. Hannah's suicide is a very unfortunate event, but I definitely don't feel like it was glamorized. I feel like some of the reasons that she ended up killing herself, and I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it, was because some of the reasons were petty, but after a while that pettiness adds up, and so after it's adding up, you start asking yourself, is this really what it is? And it starts to become reality to you. In the series, Hannah goes and she confronts one of the members of her tapes in the boys' locker room, and she stands up for herself. But kind of after that event and the continuation of the events that happened to her in her life, she loses that self-esteem and that empowerment. And I really feel like Clay should have noticed how she was and how she was acting. Specifically, I'm referencing the moment when he's having a flashback during his tape where he's in a scene, and if you aren't familiar, he is about to have a romantic encounter with Hannah, and she pushes him away just because she's so afraid and isn't ready quite yet. But he says a couple things to her, and she tells him to leave. But in his flashback, it doesn't happen like that, and he stays and he talks with her. And Hannah, in a very eerie way, looks at him in the eye and says, "Why didn't you say this to me when I was alive?" And because of how real that scene is and how just completely accurate that scene was and all of the things that happened, I don't feel like Hannah's suicide was glamorized. And I definitely feel like the series as a whole should be watched in groups and able to be discussed.
Thank you. Thank you, John. While watching the series with his teen, Zeeland East parent Tony had the thought, what is the message of this story? What are people supposed to take away from this? If it was to get people talking, it worked, but if it was to educate kids on bullying and suicide, they were unsuccessful. There's an accompanying 30-minute documentary called Beyond the Reasons that includes mental health experts discussing some of the show's more difficult scenes. So, Christy, do you believe Beyond the Reasons makes up for a lack of facts and resources throughout the show? And does it prove to be helpful?
It's certainly very helpful. I watched the series too, and I was watching it with my son. I watched it with one of my daughter's friends. Thank you, Valencia, because I was traumatized. I mean, I was really, you work so closely with so many kids, and you honestly, you know what's going wrong. You know it, and you just want to yell at the TV and tell them, oh, come on, talk to her right now, notice, do something, invite. But the end of the show, that 30 minutes, was very good. It helped me with those fictional characters. They were now themselves. And so even Bryce, who was one of the guys that you really come to just want to really kick him, he as himself was explaining how impactful playing that role was to him. And in addition, Jessica, who was sexually assaulted, she ended up talking to a friend who had been sexually assaulted in order to rehearse for this part, so she knew. And then the producers were on, they had clinicians who really spoke really directly about the impact that we all can have on people's lives and just how we treat them. And that is one thing with the Mental Health Foundation and our programs, we really focus, be nice, but we really do focus on, we have a responsibility to know that how we treat each other has an effect on how they think, act, and feel. And they said this in that 30 minutes. So if you haven't watched that, I would highly suggest to go click on that. It definitely brings it all back together. I potentially could see many more discussions happening about this with every episode, because they're such teachable moments with your kids. Well, how could this have changed? Do you ever see this? What could somebody have noticed? You're educating just through these vignettes of these folks. What was going on? What were the signs and symptoms that that person was depressed? Because I'll tell you this, everybody who was being blamed they were all at risk for depression and for suicide. And if you go back and watch it and you listen to some of the things we're going to talk about, you're going to be like, holy cow, wow, what was going on there? There were so many guns purchased and traded and bought and packed that everyone was at risk for revenge or for dying by suicide themselves.
Well, Tony said he thought the show should have mentioned mental health facts or statistics. Now, Spencer, you teach the class Live, Laugh, Love, the program to health classes in the area. For those who don't know, Live, Laugh, Love is an education program created by the Mental Health Foundation to teach teens about their mental health, the signs and risk factors associated with a mental illness, along with the warning signs and protective factors for suicide. So do you think learning the statistics surrounding mental health makes an impact on these students?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. I think mental health is not talked about enough, and we are getting better at it. But I think when I teach Live, Laugh, Love, a lot of my students are surprised to learn just how common it is. So I was looking at statistics, and in 2015, 3 million adolescents aged 12 to 17 had a depressive episode. So that's 2 weeks or longer of feelings of anxiety, despair, hopelessness, thoughts of suicide, some combination of those. And I think if for somebody who was part of that 12%, that 3 million, knowing that you're far from alone can be helpful. And I think if there was somebody who wasn't necessarily struggling with how they were feeling, knowing that there's that many people out there that what you say to them could have a potentially bigger impact than if they didn't have the illness that is depression. I think that can go a long way in helping people. That's what I
Well, supporters of the show say the point was to create mental health awareness and a discussion to talk about the topics the show brings up. However, the show itself never mentions a critical point. As we've discussed, most children who die by suicide have a mental health illness, which is treatable, we know. So, Kat, do you believe the show actually creates more stigma by skirting around the topic of depression and mental illness?
Thanks. So I think that Jack hit the nail right on the head when he said the answer to this question is no. So the show, we're debating whether or not we did a good job of educating students or young people, the community, on signs or symptoms of suicide, signs or symptoms of depression, to give people resources, and we can debate that. But the fact that we're here tonight talking about it, the fact that I've been hearing about it for the past 4 months or however long it's been out. How long has it been out? Has it been
only 31st?
Wow, not that long. It seems like a long time. So it did its job. When it says it wanted to create discussion, that's what it did. So that's pretty amazing. I've had discussion with a lot of different people who said, I watched it with a group and I was still, really triggered and it was really difficult for me to watch. Or if I had watched it in that point of feeling suicidal when I had been in that place, I know it would have been really difficult to watch. And what it did do is go back, and I think the show's producer said, okay, we're going to put some more resources there, which is what we need. We're going to talk about those signs or symptoms tonight, but I think communities everywhere are having these discussions, and that's what's so amazing. Parents are forced now, really, with schools are doing a great job of sending out this email, K-12, hey, this is the show. Here's some really important resources. And I've been doing this work for 6 years, a lot less time than these people on this side of the table. But I keep pushing kids to have these discussions. It's so important. The way you treat someone can have an effect on their mental health. Notice, invite, challenge, empower. And wow, now I can have this discussion. Okay, who watched the show? Oh yeah, right? Should have noticed, should have invited. Here's how you can challenge yourself to reach out, because that one thing that you might do, that eye roll in the hallway, you have no idea what Hannah has encountered the rest of her day, and for us as adults to understand that too. I think it's amazing discussion.
Thanks, Kat. In the original 13 Reasons Why novel, Hannah dies by suicide after overdosing on pills. The television adaptation deliberately changed the death scene to be more tragic, saying to dispel the myth of a quiet drifting off and to make viewers face the reality of what happens when you jump from a burning building into something much, much worse. Some mental health organizations have called the decision risky, stating it has led to an increase in crisis calls and sparked depression in viewers. Now, Dr. Valencia and Sarah, have you seen an increase in crisis phone calls since the series aired back at the end of March?
We definitely have. In the past 3 weeks, we have had an increased number of phone calls coming to our crisis line for our own clients that we take crisis calls 24/7 for them. And we definitely have had an increase in calls. We've had more calls in a 1-week span than we've had in a year. One day I was on call and I got 6 calls. And they are calls where parents are worried, where they're concerned, where they found a journal where the child has written down her 13 reasons and has attempted, or calls where there's teens on a bridge downtown, or calls where, the parent is upset and they have to make a call, head to the emergency room, and definitely increase in depression and anxiety, where our teens groups, they're talking about, wow, I watched that and my parents didn't know I was watching it. I thought it was okay to watch. I got so far into it, I wanted to keep seeing what was happening, and it took them much longer to return to a baseline emotionally because it impacted them so much to have watched it or to binge watch it and not, think about the resources that were available to them. So definitely at our practice, we've had a huge increase with the phones. Whoever is on call that week, we're now just expect to be waking up at 2 a.m. Expect that. But that wasn't the case 3 weeks ago.
That's incredible. Sarah, what are you seeing with the students you counsel?
Well, it's tough because it's almost graduation time
at
the high school. So a lot of things are happening in the spring, and prom is happening, and we were gone for about 10 days over spring break, which is right after the video showed. So a lot of our kids watched it over spring break on their drives down to Florida. And when they came back, that's when we heard everything about it. But I would say, since things have settled down from spring break, there does seem to be more, kids coming down. I have a friend that goes to this school, and she told me that she's feeling this way, and I'm scared. What should I do? And so then I call the neighboring school counselor and say, this information came to me. And it's actually been a great way to connect with other schools, because I get the response, thank you so much. Please tell your student I said thank you so much. We never would have known this had your student not reached out. So I guess that's a key feedback. If a student comes to you in concern for someone else, whenever you can give student feedback about thank you so much, we never would have known had you not pointed this out to us. And now as professionals, we're acting on this. That gives them a reinforcement that you did not see in the video, that the school counselor is acting on this.
Thank you. Well, the series does not shy away from graphic content, as we know, sexual assault, rape, suicide. While some argue that this may not seem appropriate for young viewers, the other side says it gives viewers an honest depiction of how traumatizing these acts really are. So do you see the advantage of young people being exposed to these scenes? Do you have an opinion on the proper viewing age for this series? Valencia.
I don't necessarily think that there's a proper age for it, because we have clients that they're telling us that their 10-year-olds are talking about it at school, that their friends are watching it. So we believe it's going to happen with or without your permission. So the best way to do that is to have a conversation with them. Now, honestly, do I think a 7-year-old should watch it? No. And do I really think anyone should watch the last suicide scene? I don't think so, because I can just know that she committed suicide. I don't really need to see the graphic detail of it, and personally, I chose not to watch that part. So I don't think that someone that is young really has to see that to know that suicide is eternal, that they don't get to come back and tell their story.
All right, thank you. Well, let's turn to the students right now. A comment that alarmed parent Tony again was something one of his kids had to say, quote, "If Hannah had 13 reasons, I have about 7 to go." Students, this question is for you. Can you relate to this comment? Did Hannah's reasons make you think of instances in your own lives as reasons to blame others for your overall well-being? If not you, maybe somebody you know. Can you comment on that?
Personally, I don't really resonate with what she said because I kind of feel in a way that the series is not meant to be understood by everyone, and not everyone is supposed to resonate with what is happening in the series. And I really feel in that comment that it was made sarcastically or a joke, and I would like to cite the fact that most comedy is cited, while it's a satire, it comes from something deep and dark. And because that whoever said that they didn't truly understand what they were saying. I wouldn't really place blame on others because they might have had a completely different interpretation of what they said or what they were trying to get across to me. It's really about properly interpreting what's happening and keeping the right people in your life so that you don't have the terrible things that happened to Hannah.
Yeah, and I think one of the main causes of her suicide was her depression illness, and depression is like, well, a mental illness, and nothing really causes it, but the instances that happened in her life definitely made it worse for her to cope with it and deal with it. And I think those instances may be worse than the depression, but didn't cause her suicide.
One of the things that the counselor says in the series is you never know what is going on in someone's mind when they take their own life. And the tapes kind of help us look into her mind and see actually what she was thinking when she did this act. And I don't think the reasons or the tapes were meant to blame anyone. They were to make us understand what actually goes on in someone's mind when they do this. It makes us understand and kind of shed some light on it.
So yeah, in regards to that comment that you mentioned earlier, I think this shows cinema and is art and is meant to be interpreted differently by different people. So I think for parents whose children watch this show, having that conversation about how they interpreted what went on would be helpful.
While watching the series, viewers form a bond with the character Clay who's listening to the tapes. You learn to like him, and it's possible that viewers even trust him and believe what he says to be true. Now, in the end, he's convinced that the 13 people on these tapes contributed to Hannah's death. So, Christy, can you blame others for a suicide?
Well, a lot of it is when someone enters into stressful situations, has been abused, there's a lot of risk factors. But for these students, and especially following a death by suicide, they're left with puzzles, trying to put the pieces back together and figure out what exactly happened. And when people don't understand, and I would be curious if this school had any mental health education going on where they can understand what are the signs of suicide, what are the signs of depression, maybe this is not how it would have been. And we know that pointing fingers, ultimately, Hannah lost her battle with a very serious illness called depression, that she was at risk, and there were certain things going on in her life that even put her more at risk. So those risk factors were assault. Those risk factors were that she was being bullied, okay? These things, it doesn't mean that everybody who gets bullied is going to die by suicide, but for Hannah, it was enough that that was something that contributed to her death. So with Clay, he also was experiencing a lot of grief, and with grief comes guilt in himself. And so that is part of the grieving process, and it was obvious that these kids were still experiencing a lot of grieving where they were pointing fingers. So he was a character that I really liked a lot, and at times I just felt that I wanted him to just take notice. I wanted him to just step in, but a lot of times people are very much afraid to do that.
Well, someone from the community commented on the Mental Health Foundation Facebook page saying, I watched 13 Reasons Why with my 15-year-old. We took the time to discuss these issues and how real they are at her own high school. I'm curious how teens in today's world can be a positive for the negatives and help without being ridiculed or labeled not cool. So Sarah, you deal with teens on a daily basis. What advice do you have?
In terms of advice that I have, I tend to look at my teenagers and ask them. I think that we at Rockford have dealt with a lot of suicides all the way down to middle school, multiple. And so our kids would really like to be treated like adults in a way that adults in the building, staff members can talk to them about what's happening. And so if ever they feel that they're being sheltered or protected from some of the information, it's frustrating to them. So whenever we can be forthright with information, I think that's really helpful. I think they're at that age where they feel like adults. They might not quite be adults, but they are young adults. And they certainly appreciate that and respect us more, which in turn helps them to come talk to us more when we can speak to them frankly. I started a peer-to-peer outreach group a few years ago at my school, and there are about 25 high school students, and basically their whole mission is to do mental health outreach in the building. And we happened to have a weekly meeting this morning. It was just coincidental, but I asked them what they thought. I told them I was coming here today, and what did they think, what did they feel like it was worthy of sharing. And they said they wanted more prevention before it happened. Don't react to it. And you can see in the video how frustrating it was to the kids that posters were put up on the walls after it happened, like that was going to fix something. So my kids did mention that. They kind of focused on that snowball effect, that what was happening in the video was really accurate. And teenage life is really complicated. We all remember it was complicated for us, but that was before social media. That was eons ago, it feels like. But for them, they said it's even different than it was 2 years ago. And it's really complicated. And sometimes you pair that with, parties people are having, and the things depicted in the video are happening at parties. They're not just happening in Rockford, they're happening everywhere. And sometimes parents are condoning parties with underage drinking, and they're saying things like, well, as long as you don't drive, as long as your friends give me their keys and they stay here. So there's drugs and alcohol at these parties, and then other things are happening at these parties. So then we got on the subject of prom, and one of my students said, don't get me started on prom. I could give you 5 or 6 stories of different sexual experiences that happened over prom. That was this weekend. And so kids already knew about all these things. And I feel like if we don't start listening to the kids and giving them an opportunity to talk to us about these things specifically, we're never going to know they're happening. So they very much liked the fact that we were asking them what their opinion was. They always have an opinion on everything. If you guys have teenagers, you know that. They want us to treat them like adults. They will respect us more when we respect the fact that if you feel that you can watch this video and it won't trigger anything negative for you, then let's talk about it as you watch it. Instead of, telling our students, don't watch this video. And it's not that we're telling them that at all. But I think it's really unique to be able to hear from the kids, and they want to be proactive. There's this video, they want to get in front of this video. They want to turn it into a positive. So someone said, Jack, I think said it was therapeutic. Yes, it's refreshing to hear somebody say it was therapeutic because it's making us talk about this topic. I think it's validating for a lot of kids in high school right now, in middle school maybe, but it's validating that, you know what, they made a video on this. I'm not the only one going through this. And I see that. People are connecting to so many different characters for so many different reasons that there's a lot of value and there's a lot that the kids can learn and we can learn from them.
Sarah, thank you. A big contributor to Hannah's depression was not having any friends, and one of the characters even says if she would have had one friend, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So Christy, can you give some examples of risk factors and warning signs for people to watch for or notice in others? And with that, what are protective factors and coping skills that can be utilized or implemented for people struggling with a mental illness?
This is a great question, and yes, having a friend is a key ingredient, but it goes along with that friend being the person that's going to be watching out to notice maybe changes in your behavior or what's going on. And Hannah did not have a good friend. I mean, she had friends, her parents couldn't even identify if she even had any friends, which breaks your heart when you think about that. But again, some of the risk factors are the number one risk factor for suicide is depression. 9 out of 10 times when someone dies by suicide is because they have that illness, and it can be in combination with another mental health disorder, such as anxiety. It can be in combination with an eating disorder. It can be in combination with anything. What? Am I okay? Yeah. Okay. In addition, it could be foul risk factors could be prior suicide attempt. Another one could be access to a means. So right now, if we see the next season, and I really hope that they put a great spin on it, but almost all those kids are at risk right now. Everybody has the means. Over 50% of suicides are with a lethal means, and that is with a gun. So the fact that that is showing is already kind of hyping me for the next season of what do we have to come. Are they going to really spin it to do an increase of awareness? They have the opportunity. Struggling with sexual orientation, and we saw that in the character Courtney. So she has a risk factor right now in that she had not come out to her family yet. A family history of suicide, so we don't know that in any other families in the show, and we don't know that about Hannah. But Hannah's family had a lot of struggles going on, and Hannah felt that she couldn't talk to her parents about what was going on in her situation. And a lot of that goes hand in hand with not wanting to put fear into the parents of anything going on. Also blaming themselves for what was going on. Another one would be stigma, and that would be not wanting to go get treatment. We have a high amount of suicides amongst middle-aged men, and that in general is for men. They think that they can get over it and solve their problems in their own way. What I love about everything, and this is where we want to really focus on, is having protective factors, and those are good problem-solving skills and having strong ability to cope. Right now, we're in a society where a lot of times we just think that if I solve the problem for my kid, they're going to be okay. When in actual, they also need to empower themselves, the E in NICE, to solve and to come up with solutions on their own, and I can help them along the way. Strong connections is a huge key ingredient for a protective factor. I didn't see this with Hannah. I saw that one of her protective factors was she had a job, and her enjoyment with her job was really seeing Clay. But other than that, I didn't see that she was involved in clubs and organizations. Some of the other kids were. She started to with the poetry class, but that ended up not being a good thing because then her poem was read and published in this magazine. But being involved, and that is why it's a key ingredient during those high school years. Get involved with things and find your place. All three of the students down in the end, I know they're all involved. I met Jack at Forest Hills on Unity Day, and he came up and told us where he gets some of his strengths from, and that is being involved in his school. And another huge piece is having access to services and utilizing services. And so in schools, a lot of the place where you can get access as you start, we're going to talk more about this, at the counselor's office. You have friends that maybe have noticed change. I'm going to go with you. And then what happens from there is they find great services like what Dr. Valencia provides. So those are those good protective factors.
Christy, thank you.
Can I say one more thing? Sorry. Emily, I think the beginning of that question was one of the characters says if she would have just had one friend, this wouldn't have happened. So we at the Mental Health Foundation do a lot of post-vention work also, and we're in schools where counselors are saying after they've had a terrible loss of a student that people are pointing fingers. So we want to have that discussion also along with the show that Hannah died from an illness, right? Just again, we're repeating it again and again. That illness was depression. We could have recognized risk factors, but let's not say could have. Let's move forward and say what we can do in the future to notice, invite, challenge, empower.
Thanks. All right. No, that's all right. Well, Caitlin, as the Be Nice Leadership President at Granville, how could the Be Nice Action Plan, as Kat just mentioned, have been implemented throughout the series? That is a big question, because that's really, where is the lesson here? How can you guys impact this?
Clay, who was the closest to Hannah, definitely noticed something was wrong the night of the party. How could she not? She was yelling, she was crying. He definitely knew, he didn't know what, but something was definitely wrong with Hannah. And that's the first step in the action plan. He noticed, but he didn't take that next step. He didn't invite or challenge. He didn't seek Hannah out and ask her, what's wrong? I will give you help. What Hannah says, you did exactly what I told you to do, but not what I needed you to do. And that's like the hardest part of the action plan, is knowing when to take action and when to give someone help when they really need it. In that moment, if Clay would have invited Hannah to open up to him and gotten her some help, I think things could have gone different for Hannah. As for the rest of the characters in the series, they never really noticed that Hannah was ever struggling. They were a little wrapped up in their own challenges that they were facing. If one of those people had noticed and just approached Hannah and asked her anything, they would have seen that she was struggling with a little of all of her problems that she had. Another example of the action plan is Jessica. After her party, she was seen drinking excessively, out partying, drunk off with her friends, something she never used to do or would do. But no one seemed to notice her abnormal behavior, and no one really approached her and asked her, and she didn't get the help that she needed. And if someone would have just went up to her and noticed and taken that action plan, she would have gotten the help, and she would have talked it out and gotten some good advice. As for the school as a whole, empowerment is something that needed throughout the entire school. The writing on the walls, the swear words in the hallways, those could all have been replaced with encouraging statements, because high school is a really hard time for everybody, and we don't need to tear each other down. We need to build each other up, because it's a hard time. Notice, invite, challenge, empower. I think those are really vital to the high school experience.
Very good, thank you. Well, the way the adults are portrayed as incompetent or clueless is seen as a major problem in 13 Reasons Why, because it could dissuade students from seeking critical assistance, and it could send the message that adults really just don't care. So in the last episode, Hannah reaches out to an adult for the first time by going to her school counselor, and the situation is not handled appropriately. So Sarah, this question is for you. You can give a more accurate description of how a school counselor would handle a suicidal student who would go to help. And you kind of already touched on this by somebody already coming to you and having a concern about a student at another school.
Right, but I think when a student comes to us, they don't just say, I've been considering killing myself. So key point is to, when you have a student appointment, be 100% present and ask them, how are you doing? And slow things down, because it's fast-paced at the high school and we're busy. And just like they show in the video, the counselor's busy. Obviously he's busy, his phone keeps ringing. So I think the students gauge you by some sort of presenting issue that's somewhat simple. And then it's how you handle that issue. It's like they test you first. And then if you pass the test, then they're gonna give you the good stuff. And then that's when I start to say, 1 second, I'm going to call the secretaries. I'm going to cancel my appointments so that I have plenty of time to spend with you. That way they know that they're my priority, and I'll tell them, this is my priority right now. And that way the secretaries know not to call into my office too. So secondly, I let them talk for a while, and sometimes it's a long time. And in the back of my mind, I know I'm not letting the student leave my school. There's a lot to be done, so I let them talk. I let them say everything they need to say. And I also ask them, do you have a plan? Do you know how you're going to kill yourself? Do you have access to pills? Do you have access to a gun? They want to tell you what their plan is because it's important to them. I mean, it really is important to them. So sometimes they'll tell you where they keep the pills and when they're going to take the pills after the parents go to bed. And it's scary to sit and listen to this. And you want to do everything you can to make them understand, I'm not going anywhere. I'm walking with you right now, and I'm not leaving. So they continue to talk, and then they typically know that I can't just keep that secret. So at some point I say to them, okay, you have access to a weapon or pills or knife. You have the means to do it. You have a plan in place. So this is pretty serious. Sometimes I give them a scale, 1 to 10. 1, you are definitely not planning on committing suicide. 10, you know when you're doing it and how you're doing it. And it's going to happen soon. And they give me a number. Kids, it's easy for them to give a number. It's black and white that way. It doesn't always make sense, but either way, I'm calling someone at home. So typically then I say, we need to include your parents in this. And there's sometimes a discussion on that. It's usually not that difficult to involve the parents. And I'll say, I want to invite your mom to come in or your dad to come in. We're going to sit down together and we're going to talk about this. And it's not really something that you want to discuss over the phone. So the student's typically hanging out with me in my office. And parent gets there very quickly. And then we discuss. And sometimes I have the student tell the parents. So it's coming directly from the student. Sometimes I'll call Forest View or Pine Rest directly because we have a space issue in our mental health hospitals with beds, and they can't always take our kids, even if they're talking about suicide. So it's always good to call one of those places, sometimes on their behalf, and ask about insurance and clear the way for the parents, because sometimes I've gotten the feedback from the hospitals, thank you so much for giving us a heads up that they're coming. We're going to be expecting them at this time. So it's very much a careful handoff. So I have the student, I'm with the parent, I hand off to the parent hands off to the health provider at the hospital. The student's never alone. We make sure the student never leaves the school, never takes the bus home. And sometimes if it's an issue of no space in the mental health hospitals, we do have to send the student to the emergency room because then they will take them. And sometimes it opens up a bed at Forest View or Pine Rest. So at that point, the family takes over, and that's when we would give it a day and then do some follow-up with the family and then provide resources and referrals. And it's funny, when Valencia sat down next to me today, I said, I just referred you today to a family, Valencia. So there's a lot of that going on in the community. I tend to give families 3 or 4 referrals to counseling resources because really I like to think of myself as a triage at the school. We are not meant to be doing therapy with students, but we are sometimes the first line. And the students are deciding, just like Hannah did in the video, am I going to talk to her? Is she going to answer my question? Sometimes it's something as small as an academic question. And if I don't answer it the right way, or if I'm not patient enough with the student, they're not going to tell me their personal information. So I have to be very careful with every student appointment because I never know what it's going to turn into. And it's also a matter of a long-term relationship I have with kids over 3 years. And how I treat them in 10th grade determines what they'll share with me when they're in 12th grade. So it's pretty tricky.
Yeah.
So the very final thing that we do is the referrals to the outside agencies. And sometimes we coordinate with them and we have releases signed by the family so that the therapists and the school counselors can talk back and forth to determine the best way to reintroduce the student back into the school when they're ready.
Sarah, thank you. Now, students, I'm interested in what you think about how the adults were portrayed. Did you see any adults in the series that you would feel comfortable confiding in? Or did you see any adults that maybe Hannah should have confided in?
I was not really that surprised of how the adults were portrayed in the series. Towards the end, in the final episode, Hannah goes and she's talking with Mr. Porter, and like you said, he didn't answer all the questions the right way, and the situation wasn't right, so that she was able to open up about her personal life. And that I can definitely see as a struggle from being a counselor in high school. Hannah wasn't in the right mindset to just completely open up and say everything that she needed to say. As far as her parents, I believe their parents had some idea that she wasn't okay, but they didn't have any idea to the extent of where it was. And so that is where I invite parents to open up discussion with their kids and sharing a little bit about yourself and saying things that aren't typical parental things to say, such as, today I was feeling sad because of X, Y, and Z. Opening that up and opening yourself up will encourage your kids to open up themselves. I know that's definitely the case it is with my parents. They might say why they're having a bad day, and we can have a discussion, and I can tell my parents why I'm having a bad day, and they understand and they can listen. But Hannah didn't have that with Mr. Porter or her parents because they were preoccupied with other things, and she wasn't able to just completely open up by herself.
Lucy, let's hear from you. You're shaking your head, yes?
I think that's true. I know with my parents, they try and they made it clear that no, if I'm ever in a situation where I need to call someone, I can always call them and they won't be mad or upset. They'll always be there for me. And so I think that's really important to have someone, whether it's a neighbor, a friend, just some teacher maybe who's a trusted adult that you can always reach out to, because that's really helpful, because sometimes it's hard to talk to your peers because they might not always keep things confidential, and rumors spread, and some of those relationships don't always last as long as you hope. And so the information that you wanted to only confide in one person and spreads to everyone else. And having just one trusted adult is more beneficial sometimes, and they can point you to more resources.
So we need a lot of good trusted adults out there, don't we? Yeah. Well, suicide is not the simple consequence of stressors or coping challenges, but rather it most typically, as we've learned tonight, it's a combined result of treatable mental illnesses and overwhelming or intolerable stressors. A comment from an expert in the New York Times article said, the show's fatalism leaves the impression that suicide can't be stopped. In one concerning scene, a character agonizes that he could have done more to help his friend. The school counselor tells him, if she wanted to end her life, we weren't going to stop her. Christy, can you speak to this? Is this comment harmful or helpful for viewers to take away?
Well, that's the point in the show that I really felt like there was no hope. And I just am all about hope. That there was a study done on some survivors of an attempt of suicide, and they were between the ages of 13 and 34 years old. And 1 out of 4 contemplated for less than 5 minutes to take their life. So we always have the ability to be on the phone with a person, not leaving them alone, talking to them, working out those protective factors. I actually I called the 1-800-273-8255 number today, and a friend of mine answers the phone at Network 180, so we were just chatting on what he does, and it seriously is keeping someone on the phone for 5 minutes can actually help that person and empower them to come up with some thoughts for themselves. Who are the people that you can call? What do you usually do when you feel this way? What was going on right now to bring you to this point to feel this way? So these helplines are absolutely essential. Everyone should leave here tonight with that phone number in their phone, 1-800-273-8255. In addition, there's a point also, and this was shown in the movie, where Hannah was right there waiting to talk to Mr. Porter and tell him how she was feeling. He never asked the question, and she gave him a lot of hints. She gave him the opportunity to ask, are you thinking of killing yourself? He didn't do that. When she walked out, if you watch the movie again, she wanted him to follow her out. She stopped, she said this in the tape, she turned around, he wasn't there. She kept walking. She did this on several occasions in the movie. Her final scene was when she walked out of the building and she was hoping someone was behind her. She turned around and no one was there and she kept walking. So there always is that hope. And I'll tell you that a lot of statistics show that someone wavers. They want the pain to stop and they are wavering. If you've ever seen the Kevin Hines story, he's another gentleman who attempted suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And his story, he says it, he was bargaining in his mind all the way up until he got to the bridge, hoping that someone would smile at him. I mean, sometimes people say, you can't tell me a smile is going to stop somebody from taking their life. That could be that moment that that person felt a connection for that moment. Bargaining in his mind, he said, if somebody asked me what I was doing, if this person, when I was on the bridge sobbing, if somebody would have come up to me and asked me, are you okay? Can I help you? So that's the hope in it.
Yeah.
Is if we can keep the conversation going, not be afraid to ask somebody, to invite myself to ask somebody how they are doing, challenging them and empowering them.
And again, a lot of good tools, BeNice.org.
BeNice.org.
That's right. All right, well, it is 7 o'clock, so we're going to open it up here to our guests. Anyone want to start with a question? I can hand off my microphone. Go ahead.
Probably most of you have heard ACEs. I just wondered if you would comment on how ACEs may factor into some of this.
Big time. So that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it is a survey out there that is now understanding the impact of traumatic experiences as children can have an impact on adults. So what it is it's this big study that has been very successful in finding those traumatic experiences that can happen in children that could lead them as adults to struggle with a mental health disorder. So the study is coming through by basically surveying people in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, 60s, who have been hospitalized, who struggle with substance use disorder, who utilize the system, who have attempted suicide. And what they're looking and finding is that all these traumatic events can, believe it or not, yes, have an effect on how you are as an adult. So then we see the cycle happening because these folks that struggle with adverse childhood responses are also bringing their kids up in very similar ways. So the trauma is very cyclical. So, right, we can figure that out, but now we need to recognize it. And for children, and I'm sure Dr. Valencia could talk on these, the big talk now is the word trauma. And so looking as what traumatic experiences kids are dealing with. So in Hannah's case, she journaled. I mean, did you see one scene? She pulled out all her journals and she talked about being bullied as a kid. So we see that moving can be traumatizing to kids, leaving their normal school district, the school district where they've been, moving within their own district. In Hannah's case, she moved from a big house to a little house. Okay, could that be traumatic? Sure. Financial issues in her house were traumatic. The sexual assault was traumatizing. The witnessing and hearing her friend being sexually assaulted, that brought on post-traumatic stress. So she had flashbacks through the whole movie of that scene.
I'm going to answer my own question here because that's interesting. I'd like to hear from Dr. Valencia about trauma because I think that word, again, it's something big, it's something traumatic, but trauma can be different things to different people. And can you comment on what is considered trauma, that some things that we don't recognize as trauma, but are traumatic to kids and adolescents and teens?
Christy already said some of those things that are traumatic, and it does. It varies greatly based on the child, based on their temperament. You know, what might not be traumatizing to me may be traumatizing to someone else. And as part of our intake process, we do a little bit of investigation about trauma. So we're asking questions. Did you move? How many times did you move? Where did you move from? Did you have a loss of friends? Did you have any hospital stays? Did your parents have any hospital stays? Like, did mom have to go in the hospital and have surgery, but the child was at home or with another relative? Were there any head injuries? Were there any accidents? Did they have to have stitches? Did they have broken bones? That it doesn't always have to be a big trauma, like the house burned down, or that they were sexually assaulted, or some form of abuse. There can be any variety of ways that people can experience traumatic events, and it's difficult for them, and it's difficult for them to recover from it. And they don't even always realize that it was traumatic until somebody labels it or asks the question, and then they'll pause and it's like, oh,
That's trauma.
yeah, that really did affect me.
Thank you.
One more.
Yeah.
Oh, can I go before?
Yeah.
I was gonna. So what we can do as lay people, we want to leave here with tools, right? Just not minimize those first feelings that a young person says, right? This breakup of a relationship that lasts maybe 5 minutes. You're walking down the hall. You never held hands. It wasn't that big of a deal. But that's that first time that brain is experiencing those chemical changes brought about by an event, right? So never saying, oh, there's more fish in the sea, right? Or minimizing that moment of feeling like, I'm just thinking about my upbringing. I had to walk, both ways uphill to school without shoes. Okay. Yes, our experiences are so different. But what we can do is keep an open mind and just say, how are you thinking, acting, and feeling? And say, that must be really hard for you. Don't silver lining it, sugarcoat. That must be really hard. Yeah.
Good, that was it.
Oh, thanks.
I'll get there.
I just wanted to, I didn't hear anything about ego strengths and statements about ego, the internal mechanisms for healing yourself. The ego and the role of ego is very positive in terms of dealing with the type of subject matter that we're talking about. Is you got to be able to build a person from within, so that when the trouble comes, then they have protection. So the role of ego and ego dynamics, the ego strength, comes into play, because if you strengthen me from the inside, when the booger man comes, then I got something on the inside that I can deal with it. That's similar to what people do in terms of religion. They teach you Christ so that if you Christ-centered, when the crazy man come, when the devil come, then you got Christ in you to fight the devil off. So it's a similar situation when you talk about ego. And so in dealing with all of this hopelessness stuff, because hopelessness is all over. It's everywhere. But then we have to figure out a way to build that person from the inside out. So the role, teaching them how to deal with the ego.
And that is really what we are working on, and that is building resiliency and building self-esteem. And so part of what our program, Be Nice, does is it's strength-based. So the whole thing is noticing what is good and what is right about people. Because that is building that inner ego of what is good and what is right. People are telling me this. There's a big movement within the schools on positive behavior, focusing on the positive, like what's good and what's right about that kid. Can I pump them up, right?
Accentuate
the positive, you got it.
Because when you you accentuate it,
Yes.
you can do it in an open manner,
Yes.
or a subliminal manner.
And then it's building it through protective factors, so having good coping skills and problem-solving skills, but having people along that journey to help them in that by focusing on what is good, what is right. So even if they are making mistakes, I'm going to focus on what is good and what is right first, and then I'm going to let them know what happened that could change. And in addition, again, those things that can help protective factors are having a friend. So having someone, it might be an adult, that can always pump you up and keep your ego pumped up, right? Accentuate the positive. Internal locus of control, so people are always focusing on what is good and what is right about me. Focusing that when I'm at school, I'm not doing all wrong. And Justin in the character, he only had negatives. Holy cow. What he had to go home to at night, the abuse, the criticism from the boyfriend of his mom, the drugs, the alcohol, he was really, but one thing about him though, was he was a good basketball player. But then what happened was he got sucked in by these friends to be cool, to be right, to be in the popular crowd. And then the last thing to enhance protective factors is the ability to go tell someone, to have that trusted adult that's going to listen. Because nothing's bad for your internal, nothing's better than when you know someone is listening to you and they are believing you when you're telling them what's going on.
Or you have the ability to say no.
Oh, that's always one. Just say no. I like that campaign. We should go put that on a billboard. Just say no.
I wanted to comment on what he had to say. Ego, I definitely feel like did have a very important role with how Hannah and other characters were feeling, and ego might have was the motive of how they were feeling. And really with Hannah, her ego was ripped from the inside out, and after all of the things that happened with her, with the picture being sent around and all of the rumors that were happening with her and the list, her ego started to get lower and lower and lower, and that was such a bad thing for her. And like we talked about earlier, being in a program or a club or a sport or anything really helps you with your ego, because there have been times where, for me, I don't want to do anything, but I know that I have football practice at the end of the day, and I got to go there to do that, and that helps you keep you going. So ego can be built up through these clubs and sports and activities, and playing on people's strengths can help them rebuild their ego, like with Hannah's poetry. But unfortunately, it was taken from her ego, from her poetry was taken from her by someone that wrongly published her poem that was private to her and how she wanted to present to that group. But nevertheless, she was in that moment feeling better until her poem was published. But definitely being part of an after-school activity or a sport or anything along the lines of that really helps with your ego, and probably really could have helped Hannah out.
I want to add that with that, to keep in mind for the 13 reasons why they were teens, and developmentally where we are with our self-esteem or where our ego factors come from is different for teenagers than it is for an adult, because there's some things that I was concerned about as a teenager in high school that now it's like, who really cares? Like, I don't care what you think, because it doesn't matter. Developmentally, I'm in a different place versus the factors that do matter. So everyone's mentioned the things like being in sports and having a good friend, because so much of where they will be with their ego strength later is dependent upon what's happening in the environment right now, from being in the sports and being part of a team, having a good friend, having a parent that's supportive, having a friend, other things, that those come from the external, and it starts to build them up so that it's more internal. But they're not necessarily at that point developmentally as a teenager, but we're helping them to get there.
There's a piece of paper on this table that's called Be Nice to Yourself, and we want you to take one before you leave, amongst other things, but Jess worked really hard on that.
Any more questions?
Go ahead if you want to. I have a question though for another one of our panelists.
Yeah.
So my question is for Sarah, and it's in regards to so Mr. Porter's incompetency is a big issue because it was one of the reasons that Hannah stated that she killed herself. So I think that highlights how important good counselors are today, especially in real life. So one of the areas that I don't think Mr. Porter did a good job with is how he dealt with Hannah's rape. So I'm just reading quotes from the show. When asked, did he force himself on you, Hannah said, I think so. Then when he said maybe you consented, then changed your mind. How would have a counselor today done better instead of saying maybe you consented?
Rape is a tricky issue in terms of reporting that to parents, and I think that the other counselors in the room would probably agree there's some gray area there. And typically, if a student came to me, I mean, again, you have to be patient, you have to be present, and listen to the story. And you can't report that this happened to the parents because it's further victimizing the student. So work that we do sometimes, first of all, is consult with each other. We have the benefit at the high school of working on a team with 5 counselors. So we get together periodically and we go over different situations that are currently happening. Or we say, I need all of you in this office, and then we shut the door and we talk about it and how collectively as counselors, what is the most responsible way for us to handle this. So typically the way it unfolds is, I really think it's important that you share this with safe people in your life, and that typically is parents. I can help you with that. Again, if you walk beside the student and help them, they don't feel like they're alone. And sometimes if they've reported it to you, they're more comfortable with you sharing it with the parents. And I always want the student to be right there with me when I do it so that I get everything correct. And I'll look at the student and I'll say, did I say that correctly? But sometimes the student is empowered by just my presence being there, because it's like they have a mental health specialist sitting next to them, and it validates that what they're telling their parents, the fact that I have called their parents in for a meeting and the student is ready to share this information with them, it's all very meaningful to have all of us together. It like creates a bigger power for them that they have parents in their room and they're in a counseling office and they're with a counselor. Sometimes that takes time for a victim to be able to speak up about what happened. And of course, if they're still in any danger of any sort, then of course we have to report that. But did I answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I know that in some of the schools that their counselors are really more about academics and helping kids get into college, and not really trained or prepared to address some of our issues that our kids have. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas about what schools can do. I know a lot of times it's money the schools don't have, but I just wonder if there's things that we could help schools with those that don't have some of those resources for mental health.
I think there might be a little bit of a misconception with school counselors and what we actually do. And we are bound by confidentiality, so we can't really speak out about the things that we're doing with the students. But, we all have master's degrees in counseling. So we're taught training, we're taught techniques. We are in a community setting where we do counseling for people in the community free of charge, and we're critiqued in our training in two-way mirrors. And we have professors watching us that have been in the field telling us you're sitting the wrong way, you're not facing them, you're not asking the right question. Then there are other times where we've had to tape record different situations in our training, in our master's programs, and then that's critiqued. So we really do have that training background. And then we have a 600-hour field placement too, where we're doing that. So therapy, no. Counseling, absolutely. And of course that is our priority over anything academic or career or scheduling. I'm certainly not trained in my master's degree program to schedule kids' classes. And I would really like to see...
You want to eliminate that from your job description?
Well, not going to happen. The benefit that I see in scheduling kids' classes is that I get to see all my kids. And they develop a relationship with me starting from the beginning of 10th grade. Because you know what? They want a different teacher, or they want a different math class. And we get to have a relationship. And so when something critical happens to them, I'm the first person sometimes. So there is a lot of background and a lot of training in our program. And shockingly, none of it is academic or scheduling. We have some career counseling, we have some psychology backgrounds, and we do have the clinical counseling setting where we're being critiqued constantly. Like I'm sitting with my legs crossed right now, and they would tell me not to do that even. So little things like that.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you everyone on the panel tonight. It's 7:20, we're going to conclude tonight. Thank you everyone for coming. Again, this was on Facebook Live, so this will be recorded if you want to go back and review. If you want to share it with somebody on social media, also a good idea. And of course, we want to talk about all the information they brought along that they want you to take home with you. Thank you everyone for coming.